In the last episode, we did a deep dive into the history of the Great War and what led to the end of the world. Today, we're going to be looking into the complete story of FEV and the unspeakable horrors that it brought onto the post-apocalyptic world. Back in the pre-war United States, some of the world's greatest minds were attempting to find a cure-all as an attempt to fight off Chinese biological weapons, and more importantly, the new plague that was wreaking havoc on their citizens. The plague had arrived on US shores in 2053, and within a year, the entire country was locked down under quarantine measures, bringing the nation and its economy to a standstill, continuing to ravage the country's population for over 20 years, only being slowed down by nuclear hellfire. The research project went under the name of the Pan-Immunity Virus. The research efforts began in 2073 and were spearheaded by a government contractor by the name of West Tech Industries, who was able to make great use out of their newly built factory. With the prior research on the advanced X277 magnetic rail cannon and the early head start working on a cure, they were a surefire candidate for the job. After a few years of searching for a cure, the project was deemed too difficult due to the nature of the plague and its ability to create new variants over time. The scientists did, to their dismay, manage to create an entirely new virus that gave the immunity they sought, but there was a pretty big catch. Subjects who were exposed to this new virus would begin growing uncontrollably, gaining size and muscle mass at an unprecedented rate. Upon this discovery, the manager in charge of the Pan-Immunity Virus halted the research in favor of their new, more nefarious project, the Forced Evolutionary Virus, or FEV for short. The research on the initial strain of FEV began in 2075 under heavy monitoring from the US government. The testing began on small animals and plant life with no real noticeable effect. With their lack of success on plant life, the scientists would begin testing on mammals, progressively increasing the size of their test subjects until they got results. Eventually, they would see success, with the first significant results coming from the testing of mice. They observed the new dominant strain that emerged. The mice obtained a strong resistance to radiation and a significantly lowered chance of infection. Another positive trait they observed was a large spike in intelligence, with the mice completing test mazes and puzzles in half the time of their original baseline tests. Unfortunately, a negative side effect of the virus was uncontrolled growth, leading to a massive increase in size, causing deformity and often death. Ignoring the negative effects and focusing on their progress, the scientists would continue their research, soon beginning further testing on rabbits. These tests were focused on the brain growth of the subject, with the scientists wanting to learn more about the virus's effects. After the injection, within seconds, they would observe an almost miraculous level of growth in the rabbits' brains. Though shortly after, their excitement would fade away as they soon learned the rabbits had also become extremely aggressive, almost feral, forcing the scientists to put down all subjects and start from scratch. In 2076, the testing of batch 11-011 began on their new subjects, raccoons. They were considered a prime candidate due to their already high intelligence and larger size. Initial tests showed the same increase in size, except this time the animals benefited from a highly increased intelligence, far surpassing previous subjects. As far as we know, once the tests were completed, the raccoons met the same fate as the rabbits before them. Legend has it that some of those trash pandas managed to escape the facility, fleeing into the wilderness away from human life, never to be seen again. The researchers would then refine the strain into batch 11-101A, beginning testing on larger subjects, dogs. Aside from the usual increase in size, the batch would be considered an overall failure, having the team quickly turn their attention to bigger subjects. After the disappointing results, they would combine the two previous batches, 11-011 and 11-101A, to create a new mixture, batch 11-111. Attempting tests on chimpanzees, mostly due to their similarity to humans. The subjects exhibited an increase in size, an almost complete immunity to radioactive and biological agents, as well as an almost complete immunity to cancer growth. The virus would cause the chimpanzees to again become extremely aggressive, causing 2 out of the 15 infected to die of seizures. In 2077, the US military, under command of the federal government, would order the relocation of the scientists and laboratories to a new, more secure location located in California, the Mariposa military base. At this location, the scientists, against their better judgment, began the process of human trials. Even though the early stages had shown a 60% increase in intelligence and a 200% increase in size, there was a general consensus among the researchers that human trials were a safety concern due to an unpredictability of FEV. Regardless, the project marched forward at a steady rate under the watchful eyes of the US government. Upon setting up the new base at Mariposa, the research teams would begin the development and later testing of their newest strain of the virus, FEV2, a culmination of all their previous findings amalgamated into a new, more effective mixture. Initially following the beginning of human trials, they would see massive success, giving them the confidence to further their tests. FEV2 would develop and scale until it became the dominant and most widely used version of the virus, which was responsible for most of the horrid abominations seen on the west coast of the US. Most of these abominations were made post-war, as the bombs would drop in October 2077, only months after the Mariposa facility had been officially set up. This would be the very same virus that would be responsible for the creation of super mutants, psychers, centaurs, along with the mutation of two good friends, Harold and Richard Gray, also known as the Master.
So what shall it be? Do you join the Unity, or do you die here?
Join.
Die!
Join.
Die!
When I got mutated, sure wasn't born this ugly. Happened when we tried to find out where all the mutants were coming from.
You see, when America was hit by nuclear hellfire, the Mariposa base was targeted directly by a nuclear bomb, transforming it into an unrecognizable pit of nuclear waste, which later became known as the Glow by wastelanders. It would remain largely abandoned until in 2102, two friends joined by a small group of guards would set out on an expedition to the base. Their mission was to discover the source responsible for the massive influx in mutated animals who began attacking caravans. They would end up reaching the base in July of 2102. Both of these men were hardened survivors of the Great War, living their early days in the safety of underground vaults, later leaving for the surface. Both of these men were successful in their own right. One of them went by the name Harold, a well-known caravan guard and merchant. Then there was Richard Gray, a local doctor in the hub who was well known amongst local caravanners. Together, these brave men decided they wanted to know what secrets that glowing pit was hiding.
We mounted an expedition. God, Richard Gray led a small group of us up there. I can't remember the route or anything, but I am damn sure it was northwest, though. I think. Richard Gray was a doctor. A little older than me, and friend was he smart. He found the source. Some sort of old military base. We lost a lot of folks getting in there.
Upon their arrival, they were greeted by a massive pit of twisted metal and radiation. Regardless, the men in their group quickly began to find a way to the facility. This was not an easy task. In the process of just getting into the facility, many members of the group would be lost. By the time they breached the structure, there were only 4 survivors left: Harold, Richard, a woman named Francine, and a man named Mark. After only a short time, Harold and Richard would be the last ones left standing, with the rest of the group succumbing to their wounds sustained during the fighting or fleeing the facility.
We got pretty far inside. Wasn't a lot of us left by then. Gray, me, and a couple of others. One of them robots got Francine. Mark was wounded. Sent him back to the surface. Then it was just me and Gray. To this day, I don't know. He never made it back here, and, well, I couldn't face the wasteland again, so I never looked.
The 2 men, committed to stopping the mutants, would continue fighting deeper into the tunnels until they found an odd-looking room. It was filled with massive glowing vats of goo, which turned out to be a stockpile of the infamous FEV, the source of their mutant animal attack. Upon entering the room, a crane would crash down, knocking Gray directly into one of the vats, while Harold was thrown onto the ground, being knocked out by the impact. Karl would wake up a few days later on the surface, injured, mutated, and with no memory of how he escaped.
We made it to some sort of central core, like a plant of some sort. That's when it happened. A robot crane crashed into us. Last I saw Gray, he was flying through the air and into some sort of acid bath. I was in bad shape and, well, I passed out. No, you idiot! I just said I never saw him again, didn't I? Well, I have no idea. Woke up in the wasteland, barely hanging on. Got lucky, and some traders I knew found me days later. Good thing, since I was already changing. They brought me here, and here I've been since.
Richard wasn't so lucky. Being directly exposed to FEV had temporarily paralyzed his body, forcing him to float in the substance for multiple days before being able to regain enough strength to pull himself out and drag his body to the control room. The week following Richard regaining consciousness could only be described as pure torture. Due to the extent of exposure, he would begin mutating and transforming into something completely unrecognizable from his former self. Due to the immense pain, he would fade in and out of consciousness for weeks. Upon fully regaining consciousness, he would begin injecting himself with FEV, causing even further mutations. Gaining the miraculous ability to interface with the server control equipment that ran the base, giving him access to all the government's previous research on FEV, also gaining a massive increase in intelligence due to the data banks of info he was able to freely access. Richard Gray would begin his own experiments, redoing the previous research, eventually managing to bring the project even further than anyone could have imagined. Under his new name, the Master would begin tests on animals that wandered into the facility. With these being few and far between, his testing began slowly, which gave him plenty of time to create his master plan for a new race of humans, one that could survive the horrors of the New World. Eventually, most likely intrigued by the missing expedition, an unknown man would explore the facility, reaching the base's core room, only to be captured and consumed by the Master. You see, during his trial test on animals, he learned, be it unwillingly, that he could consume other living beings, mixing their DNA with his, gaining the victim's memories and consciousness, gaining more power and mental capabilities with each unfortunate victim that wandered into Mariposa. Richard, the Master Gray, soon realized that he was put on this godforsaken earth to fulfill a greater purpose, make a better race of humans able to survive and thrive in this new, harsh world they lived in. And for that, he would need an army.
The unity is our goal. It is quite simple, really. Certainly, even you have noticed the steady downhill slide of civilization. The super mutant is the next advancement in human evolution. To save the world, we will convert all the worthy individuals. Simple, efficient, glorious.
The Master would spend the rest of 2102 and 2103 testing FEV on the unfortunate wanderers who would make their way into the base. He wouldn't have much success though, due to the extreme radiation exposure caused by living on the surface. Mutants who were created by these experiments would come out, in the words of the Follow Bible, big but incredibly stupid.
Hey, you not look like Ghoul. How come? You not Ghoul, I knew, not full Harry.
The Master would decide to consume these mutants rather than keeping them around due to their deficiencies. After the revelation that radiation ruined the mutation process, the Master chose his targets carefully, testing his subjects with a Geiger counter before the dipping process began. This allowed him to selectively create an army of the best mutants to create his new, better world. For almost 30 years, the Master would stay hidden away, continuing to refine and test his virus unknown to the survivors above. That was, until in 2131, would order its existing army to leave Mariposa to scout the surface and ultimately return with pure, lesser irradiated subjects to fuel his growing army.
My
Patience.
is almost at an end with you. Now will you join the Unity or not?
Join.
Not! Of course.
Mutants are best equipped to deal with the world today.
Who else?
The ghouls?
Please.
Normals?
They brought nuclear death to us all. This will be the age of mutants.
Mutants.
You would look to the caravan routes going through the area, abducting whole groups to dip in the vat. Eventually, in 2152, the super mutants would come across a group of so-called doomsday cultists who were coerced into pledging their allegiance to the Master, becoming human spies for the mutant army. The leader of the group, an odd man named Morpheus, agreed to his terms, transforming his cult into the Children of the Cathedral. Using the new cult as a front, he and his followers would scout out worthy wastelanders for abduction, presenting them to the Master as an offering. They would continue to grow in power, that is, until he messed with the wrong wastelander, an unassuming man from Vault 13 who, after saving his fellow Vault residents by retrieving a new water chip, would go on to challenge the Master on his front, meeting face to face with him in the depths of Mariposa in 2162. The Vault Dweller would then destroy the base, blowing it to bits, preventing the Master or his loyal army from ever returning. There are stories about this day. Some say the Vault Dweller used his overwhelming charisma to convince the Master to destroy the base himself. Some say the Vault Dweller shot the Master in the head, looted his corpse, and activated the self-destruct countdown. It's impossible to know what exactly happened on that day. Only one man knows the answer, but he never was much of a storyteller. Before we continue on to the Enclave's involvement in FEV, I wanted to talk about some other projects from around the country. Before the Great War, alongside the creation of the Mariposa Research Lab, the US government also commissioned a vault on the East Coast. This would be used as a secret testing facility in the case of a nuclear apocalypse. For the sake of FEV's development, this was a smart move, because as we all know, Mariposa, along with the rest of the United States, was hit with unrelenting nuclear hellfire. This meant that shortly after the war in 2078, the Vault overseer and scientists would have the chance to begin testing the effects of the virus on their unsuspecting dwellers. Scientists would manage to create their new strain named EEP, similar in many ways to its Western counterpart, but distinct in a few specific areas. This new variant would be administered by airborne particles rather than injection, and would cause the skin of subjected supermutants to become a distinct yellowish-green color. The most problematic difference was a tendency for subjects to continue growing indefinitely. You can still find some of the original infected mutants stomping around the capital wasteland. You'll have no issue seeing one from a distance, considering they're the size of a 3-story building, bright yellow, dumber than a rock, and meaner than a Yaoguai. Locals would name the beasts Behemoths, a fitting title for these grotesque examples of what the US government was willing to do to their own citizens. Due to these underground tests becoming out of control, the super mutants would break out of the vault, terrorizing and capturing wastelanders of the capital wasteland. There was another strain being developed by a secretive organization, only rumored to be real by the local inhabitants. The group I'm talking about is the Institute, a secret underground city built under the old MIT University building in Boston. They consisted of scientists descending from the university staff and students who fled to the tunnels in 2077, who later dug out and built a home to live and study in. By 2220, they constructed a dedicated facility for FEV research with the hopes of building a super mutant labor force. The strain was similar to its counterpart found in Vault 87, with a few distinct traits. The mutants would gain much less muscle mass, but would gain a higher average IQ than most other variants. Thus, the mutants were able to build proper defenses, work in teams with a command structure, along with training mutant dogs to fight by their side. They would also still retain the ability to speak, thanks to their lesser growth. Following what the scientists considered a failure with the mutants, their focus would be shifting to their new synthetic organic 3rd-generation synth, but never fully stopping their research. Over the decades of capturing, testing, and re-releasing other FEV subjects, the entirety of Boston had become overrun with super mutants, slowing their efforts to rebuild immensely. In 2227, upon the capturing of Sean, a source of complete radiation-free DNA, the Organic Synth Project would be spun off using their FEV research data to create their new machines. The ultra-realistic, human-like robots that have driven the citizens of Boston to a state of fear and paranoia. The FEV project would suffer a massive setback upon the appointment of Brian Virgil, the head of the department in 2286. Unlike his predecessor, Brian believed the project had run its course, having no long-term benefits, also believing the projects were completely inhumane. When his superiors refused to listen, he would transform himself into a super mutant, destroy the lab, and escape the Institute, never to be seen again. This embarrassment would be covered up by the leaders of the Institute, hiding the truth from even the highest-ranking scientists. Over 500 miles southwest of Boston in Hunterville, West Virginia, there was yet another strain of FEV being developed. The virus in question had originated from the pre-war West Tech research effort. Interesting enough, the effects of the virus would be identical to its post-war Institute-developed counterpart. Though never confirmed, it has led many people to assume the Institute version was taken from the West Tech research data. Before the war in 2075, the scientists working on the project would release the virus into the local river, infecting the entire town's drinking supply. Quickly, citizens began noticing something wasn't right. People were acting strange, the military had moved into town, and people had begun going missing. Soon enough, though, these mutants would begin appearing in Huntersville, with the military quickly snatching them up to run tests. Within months, if not weeks, most of the town had become infected with FEV. The military would quickly put the area under a strict lockdown, sealing all exits with armed soldiers to avoid the escape of any subject. The army kept the reckless tests a secret from the general public in an attempt to avoid scrutiny and mass panic. And now, we are led back to the main development of FEV. The Mariposa base lay dormant and abandoned for almost 80 years, allowing nature to begin taking back the concrete structure. That was until 2236, when the remnants of Old War America, the Enclave, showed up in search for the forced evolutionary virus. The ranks were filled with the descendants of high-class Americans and politicians who were lucky enough to be sheltered away from the nukes on an old oil rig off the coast of California. They would fly over to the abandoned base with the hopes of excavating the facility. The Enclave didn't have the manpower themselves to execute a full-scale dig, so they resorted to kidnapping locals from small villages, putting them to work at the threat of death. Thanks to the extra manpower, the base was mostly cleared out in just over a month, with a pure sample of FEV being found and collected. This came at a cost though. Due to the previous vats of FEV being blown up by the Vault Dweller, the whole base was extremely contaminated. This wasn't much of an issue for the Enclave. They had power armor with air filtering systems, making the risk of infection slim to none. The slave workers, on the other hand, didn't have it so easy. Being exposed to the elements, they would begin mutating throughout the process of the excavation. Given the choice between work or death, they didn't have the option to avoid infection. Due to these wastelanders' previous exposure to airborne FEV and radiation, they would suffer awful side effects, becoming grotesque abominations, bearing no resemblance to their former selves or previous subjects. Obviously, by that point, the workers who hadn't been driven to madness and shot were pretty upset about this. That's why, upon completion of the dig, the workers would riot, attacking the Enclave soldiers who had been torturing them for weeks. This mutiny was so large that it forced the Enclave soldiers to abandon the facility, making a tactical retreat to the newly created front entrance. Many of the Enclave were killed defending their brethren. As a last resort, they would reseal the facility by blowing up the entrance, hopefully locking the surface world out and the mutants in. What was left of the expedition would return to their offshore base, handing the samples off to the Enclave Chemical Corps. Their mission was to reverse engineer the virus, with the hopes of understanding how to manufacture and manipulate it, managing to quickly engineer a new airborne variant of the virus designed to kill almost everyone it came into contact with. The research on the oil rig would continue at a steady rate, producing super intelligent mole rats, along with a gang of talking deathclaws. That was, until in 2242, a Californian tribal by the name of the Chosen One managed to get onto the structure, blowing up the Enclave base of operations and by extension, their previous FEV samples, saving the world from another apocalypse. Unfortunately though, the Enclave had a backup plan. Moments before the explosion, the research data was transmitted to the East Coast Enclave base of Raven Rock. This was an Enclave military base in Pennsylvania, run by a Zax supercomputer AI, John Henry Eden, the acting Enclave president. He and his chemical corp would quickly develop their own variant, keeping it just as lethal with the exception that it would only affect the severely irradiated of the wasteland. Their plan was to add the virus onto the newly created industrial water purifier, Project Purity, located inside the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. If added, it would kill, as John Henry Eden would put it,
anyone or anything that has been affected by mutation will be eliminated. You will likely be immune, thanks to your upbringing in the vault. Likewise, the good people of the Enclave will be unaffected as well.
The final culmination of years of work, and yet, just like their successors, the Enclave would fail to see this plan through, with Raven Rock turned to rubble in 2277 by the Brotherhood of Steel and their eventual recapturing of Project Purity. The plan would never again see the light of day. Though that didn't mean FEV wasn't being used by others for their own nefarious tasks. Thanks for watching.